Honourable Member for Jagga.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, as our world tries to deal with this pandemic and one of the world's most important democracies held its presidential election, questions about how we get our information and worries about the spread of misinformation have never seemed so important. Many of us spent hours glued to our televisions for the past 5 days, awaiting a result from the US election, and we couldn't help but notice the other decision-making process that was happening at the same time. The decision of what broadcasters internationally and locally were deciding to air on their networks and how they were reporting the ballot count. At 6:30 p.m. on Thursday local time, President Trump gave a press conference at the White House to falsely claim that the election was a fraud and that the Democrats were stealing it away from him. The US networks ABC, CBS and NBC all made the decision to cut away from the president's press conference as he was citing false statements and unfounded conspiracies. And this is something that we have not seen before during the Trump presidency, the media reporting Trump's baseless rhetoric as lies and misinformation and choosing not to broadcast it. But we know that this is not isolated. The areas where fake news and the rise of conspiracy theories continue to flourish are wide. And due to rapidly growing digital platforms and social media and a decline in traditional media, this is not unique to the US. We are all at risk from the spread of denial, mistruths and misinformation. And yet this government has no serious plan to support public interest journalism. President Trump's election rigging conspiracy theory was parroted here in Australia, in fact, most shockingly by government members. Both George Christensen and Matt Canavan used their official social media accounts to share posts alleging voter fraud in the US.
Just ask the member for Jagga to refer to members by the correct title.
Yes.
Deputy Speaker. Yeah. And the Prime Minister has not publicly condemned those comments. Not surprisingly, as we have seen the Prime Minister repeatedly fail to act and pull government members into line when spreading misinformation. All year we've seen social media accounts from the government side wrongly spruik hydrochloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19. This kind of misinformation is outright dangerous. And perpetuating these lies and blurring the line between fact and fiction only continues to undermine and erode our democracy. Climate change denialists, far-right hate groups, Islamophobia and COVID conspiracies, all of these spread in social media bubbles on platforms like Facebook and Twitter. And I've read with great interest and alarm in recent days reporting by Business Insider explaining how Sky News now has one of the biggest social media reaches of any Australian media organisation to spread their own unique brand of information and opinions. Meanwhile, the news sources where we used to get our information from that helped us to create shared stories about what was actually going on in our communities are declining almost to the point of extinction. Our national broadcaster, which we know has been a trusted source that people have looked to for reliable information during this pandemic, has had its budget repeatedly slashed by this government. And just tonight, they've been using the Senate to try to preemptively undermine the ABC's independence because they're not prepared to face scrutiny. Public interest journalism is on the endangered list in this country, and the government has no real plans to change the situation. We know from data collected by the ACCC that between 2008 and 2018, 106 local and regional newspaper titles closed across Australia. That's a net 15% decrease in the number of these publications. Earlier this year, we nearly lost the independent newswire AEP. The number of journalists employed in print and online businesses fell by 20% from 2014 to 2017. We are experiencing a crisis of information in this country, and it requires the government to think differently about how it supports public interest journalism. It requires some creativity, some new thinking about how do we have information flourish that is trustworthy? How do we support journalism that tells us what's going on in our community without peddling misinformation? How do we call out lies and mistruths? And what role do all of us as leaders in this place have to do that? If we continue to drift along, our democracy is at risk. Our sense of what makes us a strong,
The member's
cohesive
time
community
has
is at risk.
expired, and I call